This is Don Larson. We are ready to get started with our webinar. So let's get started. The agenda for today is going to be, we'll start off with just going through our general housekeeping rules for the webinar. Many of you are already familiar with them, but just quickly go step through them. Then I'm going to give you a company overview, just for those of you who aren't familiar with Larson Software. And then we'll have our start off with some background on CGM and SVG. We're going to cover some the issues and challenges with conversion and display of both formats, and then more of a dive into technical requirements, and then we'll have a short demo of some of the technology to work with CGM and SVG, and then wrap up with a summary and a Q&A where everybody can give us their questions. So if you do experience any problems, use the little chat box in the control panel. All attendees will be muted for the duration of the webinar, but we'll have a Q&A at the end, of course. And then computer audio is recommended. There's some little handouts that you can, the arrow's pointing to the little handouts, little PDFs you can drag and drop to your desktop. We welcome you to do that. Post your questions at any time during the webinar in the little questions panel. And like I said, again, we'll be following up on the questions after the main presentation. Larson Software is, we're based in Houston, Texas, and we were founded in 1984 as graphics technology experts, which we've been doing for over 30 years. We develop powerful, innovative graphics software and toolkits based on open standards like CGM and SVG. We promote the CGM usage with which used to be a free one, but now is available for a nominal fee on our store. We're developer of the first HTML5 CGM graphic viewer that eliminates the need for plugins. And we're a member of the CGM Open Foundation. And our software, generally speaking, simplifies the technical, the graphics workflow for technical publication professionals. And there's a link to our websites if you're interested. So with that introduction done, I will now turn it over to David Manick for the presentation, the main body of our presentation.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Don, for the introduction. And Don will join us again at the end to help with the questions. So thanks, everybody, for attending. I thought it'd be good to share with you the drivers why we do this particular webinar. We tend to do it each year, and every year we have some news to share with you or experiences. So I think as we come out of the pandemic, this will be good as events start again and the organizations such as S1000D begin to ramp back up again. So it seems like a good time to share what we've learned over the last year. And one of the things is that the interest in SVG is continuing to grow. One of our most popular products is our CGM to Vector or CGM to SVG converter, which I'll give you a brief demo later on. And one of the questions we get asked from customers is CGM still relevant? We believe it is because it's still in the specifications, but again, we'll cover that as we go along. Should we only have one 2D graphic archive? Again, that will be dependent on your requirements as a company or an organization. What is Tech SVG? And we'll discuss that because that's important for the interchange of information with SVG. The pitfalls and benefits of using SVG. What are the technical requirements? So what kind of software do you need, and what do you need to bear in mind when you're doing conversions or staying as you are? And also we'll hopefully communicate a bit about our strategy going forward. We'll share what we're going to try and do, mainly with organizations such as S1000D, as I said, as we ramp back up again. So these were the main drivers. So historically, CGM is probably considered an old format. It doesn't mean to say it's a bad format, but it's certainly been around since the 1980s. So it's been developed in the early days quite strongly. I would say it's not really changed now for a number of years, but it does the job that we need it to do. SVG is, again, it's quite an old format. You'd be quite surprised if you look it up. More kind of based around the web and delivering vector graphics on the web. So it was never really designed as an interchange format. And that's something that, certainly within our industries, where you have to be interoperable is a downside. But we've been working on that, and we probably share some information on that today with you. So the two formats have quite a lot in common, and the commonality is probably the crucial parts, and that's really focused around metadata. But the other thing is they're both open, which is obviously important for us as an industry. Proprietary is a no-no really when we want to interchange data between companies and organizations. And I'd say they're both suitable for technical illustrations. They contain all the right attributes, like metadata, contain raster data for kind of legacy. So everything we really need in a file format is in both. They both have potential to be validated. Certainly CGM, there's already tools out there that validate that against a CGM against a profile. SVG doesn't really have anything at the moment, but it certainly has the potential to have it through a schema as it's XML based. And metadata can be included in both files. So when I say metadata, I mean interactive graphics, so hotspots and things like that. Also, SVG has that additional capability of animation, which could be quite useful when delivering technical publications. So the display of vectors in a web environment, certainly with CGM, used to be dependent on a plugin technology and ActiveX control. And that certainly could cause security concerns. So a lot of plugins went away. And the advantage of SVG was that it was native to HTML5, so there was no plugin required. We recognized that with CGM and actually developed our own non-plugin product called VisXView HTML5. So we'll also have a look at that in the demo part. So a bit more background on CGM, computer graphics metafile. As I said, it's 2D. It's 2D only. It's not owned. It's non-proprietary. I would say the CGM Open Foundation is not very active, and that's not because of anything in particular, but certainly the format is very mature, and probably at this point doesn't really need anything major doing to it anymore. It's a W3C standard, or the Web CGM profile that was really specifically developed for the web, and it is adopted by the S1000D specification. You'll find it mentioned in the spec. So, as I said, CGM was predominantly used in IETMs and so forth. We're using a plugin technology, but that will begin to go away, or has already gone in most cases, I think. So where is it used? Well, I think we all know, people here today know that it's in aerospace and defense, but it is also used in automotive. We might have some automotive people on the line. And back in the early days, oil and gas used it widely as a preferred interchange format for oil and exploration data. They didn't really use graphical hotspots for the oil and gas. It was more of as an interchange format and also a display format for displaying information. So with SVG, one of the most interesting things for me is that it's XML encoded, and that really fits well with a lot of the standards that we work with. But a lot with that also brings challenges. So you need to have like schemas, you need to have tools to work with that will do it properly, add metadata and so forth. But the good thing is it's HTML5 native and it works with all the browsers. So you can just double click on an SVG and it'll immediately open within one of the web browsers. As I mentioned, it's XML based. It's a big specification, and they actually designed a subset called Tiny, which was really for mobile phones and so forth, really to actually make it smaller. So technical illustrations, though, we found only require a small percentage of the attributes available in the spec. So we've designed something which we'll talk about later, where you can export and only really use the attributes that you need, which will obviously make this file size smaller and more efficient. So I mentioned it was XML encoded. So that's a good thing. It's based on that open standard. It's also it does have a schema, but it's a schema for the whole of the spec. So we probably need something that was more a subset of that schema. And in theory, it could be validated against an industry one. So if somebody created one, we could validate against that. So that's possible. Has somebody got the appetite to do that? So as I said, it wasn't really designed for data exchange SVG. So that could always result in interoperability issues. And we probably get issues probably a few times a week from different customers who want to exchange data with SVG. They've definitely gone down as we work with more customers and also software. But certainly we're still getting some issues that we can solve usually pretty quickly because of our expertise now with SVG as well as CGM. So a new profile could be done, but let's see as we go through into the future if that's an appetite to create that. So where is SVG used? Well, I would have said probably 3 or 4 years ago, not in aerospace and defense, and now I would say yes, it is, because we have a lot of customers converting to SVG, but mainly for display in a web environment, not really to use as a creation or an editing of the graphic post display. So keeping both file formats is still common. So it's also used in GIS systems, things like mapping software. Strangely, not used in Google Maps, which still uses raster. Graphic arts. But I think the main place that we've noticed being used is in things like dashboards and so forth, because it can be data driven. I've got a quick example that I've shown before. I tried to find something a bit more kind of relevant to us, which is obviously gear wheels in this case. So this is an SVG with animation, and we can see some of the code below here that's actually creating that animation. So mainly like JavaScript and so forth. But it shows that you could use SVG and add some more value to it other than just metadata. So that was a kind of the background. Now let's get into a bit more detail. So CGM, to begin with, is still being used by, certainly aerospace and defense, by S1000D groups and the ATA. And it can be used as is. So it can be used for both editing, creation, and also display as it is. So it doesn't need to actually change. The result is your quality and your integrity of your data remains because you're not converting it to another file format. And we have customers who actually convert files, but also use our VisXView HTML5 technology to retain their CGMs, but still view them on the web without a plugin. So we have two kind of camps, and we're sitting in both. So we want to give the customer the best of both worlds, kind of. So as I said, at the moment, mainly the conversion of CGM to SVG is for a web browser display. The advantages are that SVG is native to HTML5. It was specifically designed for web browsers, and it can contain that metadata, hotspots, for instance, and raster information, legacy data that might have been introduced into the file. So it is very similar, as we said, to CGM. But our experience seems to indicate that mainly organizations are keeping both at the moment. They don't want to really throw away their CGM files. So the key reasons you would maintain it, I think, really are the specs. So if you go to the specification like S1000D or ATA, they both stipulate the CGM file format. I did a quick search on S1000D issue 5, and the SVG acronym was mentioned once, and it was in a little bit of a line of code, and that was it, nothing else. So there is nothing in the spec to kind of determine what the SVG looks like or it's the structure of it. So consequently, two file formats is still very common. Plus, I think it's a lot easier to add metadata to hotspots in a CGM file. Say, for instance, Illustrator, I was looking at that, and we'll have a quick look at that later on. Adding hotspots to that is a much more complex activity. CGM also has a standard way of writing a hotspot. In fact, there's a whole chapter on it. So there's definitely a way that you have to do it. Whereas SVG, there isn't really a method of doing it. You could go from one software to another, and they'll each do it differently. So that really gives us problems with interoperability. So with CGM, we can easily round trip files. So that really gives CGM that interoperability between software solutions, which has been an issue with SVG, and probably until now. So with SVG, as I said, it was primarily developed for web display, not designed for data exchange. But now we've had some great success of actually round tripping SVGs, so you could actually use it as a native format, and we'll hopefully demonstrate that later. So as I said, S1000D has a whole chapter on hotspots, so you can, if you're interested in the spec, the chapter's on the right hand side. Lots of information, guidance, but no guidance for SVG, only mentioned once in the spec. ATA is similar to S1000D, so although some of the ATA projects are now using S1000D, there are legacy using the old specification, which again use CGM, and they had actually validators in place in some of the programs to check CGMs when they came in against the profile. So obviously, if you were converting to SVG, that practice would be redundant if you because there would be no validation. And we were discussing internally why we actually did our own profile around SVG, which we're calling Tech SVG, which we've been doing. We've been actually for a couple of years now. What actually drove us to do it, and it was the fact that we needed to standardize our own import and export from our software, say PhysXEdit or one of our converters, so we knew what was going out, so then we could easily bring it back in again. So really to round trip the file. So that was primarily why we actually, or Don wrote the profile for Tech SVG, so we could have a seamless import and export. And then all our customers obviously would benefit from that using our software. So we get in SVGs from different software, and we've well tested to say against Adobe Illustrator, Isodraw, and things like that. So we've got some good now filters working with those particular software to bring in the files intact and easy to use. And then once we got them into PhysXEdit, we can round trip them. So this is, I think, where we are as a company with our strategy to around CGM and SVG. So we wanted to develop some guidelines about the export and import of SVG, which culminated in Tech SVG, which we've completed. And that's also now give us the benefit of round tripping an SVG. We've published guidelines. Again, this is the profile that Don wrote, and that's available on our website, or even in this webinar, you can drag it across and have a look at it. That could also be given to the standards organizations, which we've been in contact with on a preliminary basis, so they could use themselves as a basis to write into the spec. But the overall objective was to try and make SVG interoperable, so we could exchange files easily and without issues. So from a technology point of view, we've now completed all the introduction of those optimizations of SVG export and import. So we're pretty much ready to go. If people wanted to move away from CGM in the future, then we given them a solution that would enable that. So Tech SVG is kind of a subset between the full and tiny specifications of SVG. It will really help with that import and export of files. So what else are we doing? Well, we have been talking to various people in the preliminary mode of our strategy, giving them the paper, encouraging them to look at it, and if they want to use it, then we're obviously happy for them to do that, because it'll make our life easier. But I think for the say the S1000D organization, then somebody will have to put in a change request to actually introduce it in there, and obviously then a working group would have to start work, if it was passed, to put it into the spec. So it's not just as easy as saying, "Yep, let's adopt it." And I think the change request process had been suspended, but I believe it might be now reopened. So there hasn't even been an opportunity during the pandemic to introduce anything else. So, but our strategy is to try and get more engaged with the working group when it really starts up again, and we will try and steer them or guide them or give them information that might be useful to them. So just from a more technical point of view, this gives you some idea of what we're using of the spec for Tech SVG. There's kind of an overlap between the two. So we're using a relatively small portion of the spec, but we will be extending out to support more attributes in the future as our experience kind of grows. So as I said, displaying SVG is not really an issue, because we could really open it in any web browser. It's very straightforward. The only downside I see is that you have to kind of build your own viewing environment for the SVG. If you need a toolbar or anything like that, then just double clicking on it just opens it and it's there. So you'd still need some control over that SVG, and perhaps linking to parts list and so forth. So it's not quite as easy as just using SVG. So that's why we did our Visits View HTML5, which is an environment where you do have the ability to have a toolbox and so forth, and still you use the CGMs. So don't be concerned, it's not too technical. But if you've got illustrators out there or people using hotspots in CGMs, they'll recognize this as you need to actually embed a hotspot attribute into a CGM for it to work. So you could then have to add a tooltip. You have to have an interaction. What's the interaction going to be? So say with our Visit Edit that we give you the ability to do that. If you're using something else, then you're not going to have it. So even if you were using Illustrator with SVGs, you would have to do a lot more to actually, say, add a hotspot attribute to it. And as I said, SVG doesn't really have any guidance behind it other now than TexSVG. We have a standard way of writing a hotspot out, and you'll see that in a second. So the risk of not having a clearly defined hotspot within SVG is interoperability. So you could have a viewer that just doesn't recognize how that hotspot is actually written. So you need a standard way of writing that information out. So we've tried at the bottom here to keep it as close to the S1000D spec as we can within the SVG. So naming and things like that. So the attribute looks very similar. So that should obviously help people recognize what a hotspot is and so forth. And the result will be, if you use this to an interoperability will be improved. So I think this was a key thing when we wrote TexSVG, that we actually defined what a hotspot attribute looked like and tried to make it similar to what's in a CGM. Kind of connected to this is that this is just one use case that we came across where we had CGMs that were created in a legacy software, quite old now, based on Unix called Autotron and Intercap, and they had their own way of generating CGM files, which wasn't really conforming to the spec. So when a customer tried to convert the CGMs to SVG, the conversion took place, but there was no hotspot information because of the way that they were written in. And this is within a CGM file. So we developed functionality to recognize the embedded regions within the graphic, and then obviously sorted that problem out, recognized the hotspot, and then it put them in the SVG. So it just shows you kind of our experience, and we're working with these formats every day. So you should definitely draw on those experiences if you have any issues. So the final part is the technology part. So we built in, as I said, the TexSVG profile support for it within all the relevant software that we create or develop. So VisXEdit is our kind of technical illustration tool. We can import and export SVG files from VisXEdit. As I said, we can now round trip them. It's using the TexSVG profile. It's also supporting CGM, so it's fully compliant with S1000D. So if you need both, you can do both. You can add the hotspots into the file and then take it, just export it or save it as SVG, and everything's there. So you can easily add metadata to SVG files and bring it back in and use it as well. So let's do a quick demo, I think. The irony of this bit is here, I'm going to start the demo off with Adobe Illustrator. So what I want to do is I'm just going to create some elements. So let's just create a rectangle. So this isn't VisXEdit, by the way. This is Adobe Illustrator. And let's just create a Bezier curve, so wrong tool. Okay, so I've got just 3 elements on here. I've got the ability to save as and save onto our computer, and let's save it as an SVG. Now there's 2 options: is save SVG and compressed. I've got to say I can't really see much difference in the size of the file. Obviously this is not obviously a good example, but still it didn't seem to make a great deal of difference on the file size. So let's just call this Adobe and let's save that. Now in the next dialog we do get a lot of different, all these profiles that we mentioned before are available. So I'm just going to take it, this is just default, which most people will go for. I'm just going to say default, and let's save this file out as an SVG tiny 1.1. Okay, I hope it shows desktop. So let's just see if it's on the desktop. Let's go over here. Okay, so let's just double click. And there we go. So you can see I've double clicked. This is Edge, so it's just opened directly into Edge. Quality looks quite good. No environment for me to zoom in and out. I think I can use, I could zoom with obviously tools up here. And obviously you could create an environment, but the quality is good. These are all vectors. But what surprised me here was with this kind of default setting, when I go to properties, is the file size is 388K. And I actually only drew 3 elements. So that just seemed a bit over the top. There might be a good way of optimizing that, but just straight default doesn't seem to be a very optimized file. So now I'm going to just open VisX Edit, and we'll open that file. So let's say open, and we'll just go to the desktop, and we'll for an SVG file. So we've opened the file. Looking good. I think it's grouped, so we can ungroup it. There we go. So we've got our rectangle and so forth. So what I'm just going to do now is I'm going to save as. So I'm going through some kind of interoperability thing. I'm going to save as this file onto the desktop again. We'll just say now, we'll call this Viz SVG. Okay, so it's gone onto my other screen, so I'm just going to have to drag it over. And I went to the properties, and I was quite surprised because it's actually 9K. So we've gone from 300 and something to 9. So this just seemed like ridiculous, to be honest. So let me just open that in. So this is our file. This is the VisX edit file. And you can see that this is very, I would say, clean data. It's just really data around the illustration itself. And I found that the Adobe file contains a lot of information that's probably not really needed or relevant. And that's why it's so big. So we can look at the we've got this C data. There could be a way of eliminating it. But my first thought is that most people would just go with the default. They wouldn't really experiment, and they'd finish up with a file that's really, really big for not a lot of data. So I think what I'm trying to highlight here is that the interoperability of files and the export and import of files is not that straightforward. You know, if you've got a file that's 388K and you have to store that file, I'd rather store an 8K file, or 9K file. Okay, I'm going to open another file now, just again to highlight the interoperability side of it. So I'm going to use CGM. You'll notice here we have a preview now of CGM in the file manager, so that makes it a lot easier when I'm trying to find a particular file. So this time I'm going to do an SVG export again, or save as, sorry. So this is just called exploded view, and I'm going to put that on the desktop again. So I'm going to save it. Okay. And now I'm going to reopen it. So there's my original, and now we have this one. So there's no difference. So we can round trip that file easily, export as SVG or save as SVG, and reopen it and still work with it, and the structure is still there. So we have the structure maintained, we have the hotspots maintained, the metadata, which is obviously really important, and just makes it a lot easier if you want to use that as perhaps your archive in the future, that you have now a solution that will give you that round trip. I'm just going to open just to prove that the hotspot will work. So if I just double click on the SVG here, you'll notice that I have a tooltip on the hotspot, which is grommet, which should appear here. So you can see that we're maintaining the structure. This could have been originally a CGM, which it was, but now it's an SVG, and we've still got that structure and a way of editing it. The structure's maintained, and we have a way of editing that and keeping the SVG as it is. Okay, so let's just go back to the slides. So that's obviously a brief introduction to the software. I just wanted to highlight really the that we can move files from one format to another and maintain their structure, and sometimes optimize their size as well. The other software we have two pieces of software. One is Visage Transform, which does it converts multiple formats, including SVG, and it can also do auto hotspotting, which is its main kind of differentiator from our other conversion software. So, but I just wanted to show today convert CGM to vector, which is our it's our desktop converter or command line. Again, it says CGM to vector, but it includes SVG. So let's just quickly bring that up here. I can just put that into the background so we can see the interface a bit better. So here I've just brought up a folder. I brought up the famous bike data, the CGMs of the S1000D bike. And what I can do is I can choose to convert these all at one time to SVG. So we have we call it CGM to vector because we also support PDF and EPS. But predominantly nowadays, people are using it for SVG. I've created a folder on the desktop where they'll all actually go. So I can perhaps pull that over onto here. So they're all going to go into this folder. Everything looks good. So what I'm going to do is just say convert. It shouldn't take too long. 39 files. So let's double click on our folder. So here's all our files it's converted. So I actually know one of these files has got hotspots on it. It's one of the bytes. So I should be able to open that up. I can double click and open it here. So it's obviously the bike. And I think one of them has got a tooltip, yeah. So rear brake pad. So those are all the S1000D CGMs that we've converted to SVG on in a batch mode. So again, all the hotspots work. There's a hover over them. And obviously I could take that into Visage Edit as well and add more value to it if I wanted to and retain that SVG format. So it's quite a quick process to do all those. So we also have a command line of that as well. So you could do it as a background process. It's worth mentioning as well, we have an SDK as well for CGM to vector, and we have some customers actually built it into their build process for their IETMs. So on the fly, they're converting CGMs to SVG for viewing in their IETM. So that's another approach, is that you still retain your CGM, but on the fly, you kind of converting them to SVG. So I just mentioned software development kits, and we have a CGM to vector one, as I just mentioned. So you could actually integrate it as part of an overall process or other software solution that you could build it into. And one I've been mentioning quite a lot is our Visage View HTML5, which is classed as a software development kit. Sometimes people get confused that it's like a viewer that's just off the shelf that you can use, but it's actually designed to be integrated with an IETM to view CGMs without a plugin. So we have customers who do both, obviously, convert to SVG, but also retain their CGMs. So let me just open this page. So this is actually the evaluation page for the SDK. So I thought some people might be interested to know what that looked like. It's, you know, we give you all the documentation, and all the releases are down here when they came out, and also examples, quick start guide to help you get going with the SDK, or your developer to get going with it. And I've got some examples. There's one I show quite a lot, which is the HTML table along with the graphic. So we move over and it highlights as you would in a parts list. And this is all using Visx View HTML5. So this is the CGM. It's not an SVG and is no plugin. So we give you that option, convert or keep what you have. And this works both ways. So if I click on the table, it will highlight in this direction as well. So that's one of the examples we give you in the evaluation. The other thing is that I've been thinking about is that some of the CGMs out there have companion files. So this is, we think we could do this with SVG as well. So a companion file would be the graphic, but there would also be an XML file. This is part of S1000D, where other data is contained that you can use alongside the graphic. So an example of this is the tooltips, for instance, where we go over a tooltip and we get it in English. But if we have German, for instance, this could then come from that XML file, and we could have dynamically change the language on the tooltip. So we probably need to do some more research on SVG about companion files, but certainly within CGM, that's already there, and it's documented, again, within the specification. So if I'm not explaining this very well, you have a CGM file, and then you have an XML, and they talk to each other and exchange the information, say in this case, for the different languages. Okay. So just in summary, I think we're continuing to make a significant progress on both CGM and SVG, and we've also now started a new thing on 3D as well. So 3D file format, which we've been talking about for a while, but we'll have a look at some of our other webinars, and we'll do more in the future, because we think that's something missing from the spec as well, is that there's no real guidance around 3D file formats. I would say that nobody else is really doing this work with CGM to SVG. You know, our tools are used by a lot of vendors and users, so we get a lot of information from them, which enables really us to get the best conversion that's possible. And we obviously use those lessons that we get from customers in our own software. Very valuable. So we're still focused on CGM. Please don't let me give you the wrong impression, although we just don't think there's any more development we need to do on that side. I think we've already got probably the best CGM software out there already. But we do have this strategy to try and communicate the work we've done in SVG. And this is, again, driven by customers. We had a conference call with a customer last week who really wanted to know what we were trying to do to, I suppose, evangelize SVG to the S1000D and ATA organizations. And we have started on that kind of campaign. But obviously with the pandemic, it's been difficult with no forums and so forth. So I think the first opportunity for us to do a bit more is next year at the S1000 user forum, where we can perhaps present a paper which begins to move this forward a bit. So at this point, we can take some questions. If you have any, please post them now. We've got a few already. So let me have a look if it can. I've got one here which I can probably take. I think, Don, if you can rejoin me, just unmute yourself.
Yes, I'm here.
I'll just have a sip of water. My throat is slowly deteriorating. Okay, so strangely, the first question is around S1000D. So could you use SVG as part of an S1000D project? Well, I would say the answer is yes, because there's people already and organizations already doing it. So the good thing about, say, S1000D is you can have a business rule that write for your own project. So you could actually write in some the use of SVG. So it wouldn't be part of the main spec, but it could be a business rule within the project. So I don't think there's anything to stop you using SVG. But the issue might be if you're a supplier to an OEM, you might be contractually bound to actually deliver CGM. So it depends, I suppose, where in the chain you are, if you could use it or not. Okay. I think there's a question here for Don. Is there a schema for Tech SVG? I suppose that's our schema, because there is a schema, but it's not ours, is it?
Yeah, well, there's a schema that was written by W3C, by the working group that developed the SVG. So there is a broader schema, generalized schema for the entire standard, but there's not a tech SVG profile. And that's something we've seriously considered doing, just to make it able to validate the data that was written in accordance with the tech SVG profile. So we think it would be nice to do that. Could be part of the standardization work, maybe either by us or as a group.
Yeah, I think you're right. Just had a comment on what I just said. It's really, like, say, contractually, it's S1000. It says S1000E compliant, then you are bound really to use CGM because that's the only one mentioned in the spec. I suppose the gray area is that if you use SVG for display, then what impact does that have? Because there's definitely people doing that. So I suppose it depends. Then you can't really use that file as a source or the original source. You can only use it for that one purpose only, which is display. And the other thing is that you have to bear in mind, if you convert, then there's always the risk of degradation in quality. So, or things just missing. So again, that is something you have to really consider. We're really happy with our conversion, but obviously, as an organization, you would still need some QA on that, some quality assurance to make sure that everything is going through as it should. Yeah. It's definitely there's some gray areas here, and I can't really comment because we're approaching it from a different angle. We supply the tools, so how they use sometimes we don't really have. We can only say that we provide the tools that give you a really good conversion. We can't guarantee that everything goes through, but it should do. Another question: how can we evaluate visits view HTML5? You just need to drop us an email, and we can give you a link to that site. So you can just go on there. It's a website. There's no. You just need to register your name and organization. That's it. Then you're allowed in, and then it runs. There's no expiry date. You can use it, and you can create a prototype. It would only if you then used it commercially that you would need a license. I think this one's for me as well. Do you have a command line version of CGM to vector? Oh, sorry. Well, I did say we did. Oh, is it available on Linux? Yes. So you could put it on a Linux server, the CGM to vector, and run it in the back as a background process on a Linux server. So that would be really useful for some. In fact, we have a lot of companies who do that. it just runs on Linux servers. And I think this is the final one, Don, for you. So I'm moving away from my mic. Do you think there is an appetite to write SVG into S1000D specification? We kind of said that already, but I suppose it's saying, is there anybody out there thinking of doing this? I know you had a conversation recently with somebody that might.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a growing appetite for it, or a growing need for it that has been expressed by some working with it. I think as you alluded to earlier, that the pandemic hasn't really been conducive to standards work going on. The real absence of face-to-face, our face-to-face S1000D meetings is really, it just hasn't been. I think that's the value of these face-to-face meetings. They bring people together with needs, and they can begin collaborating and exchanging ideas, and then out of that grows some more standards work. So I think there is an appetite, but there doesn't seem to be the environment that allows it to come together. And but I start to see that changing as things kind of unfold here. So and we're certainly interested in participating and contributing in any way we can. So yeah.
I would agree with that. With what you just said, Don. I think with obviously a lot of companies have been concerned about their companies and their organizations, and not as much around the standards. And it's kind of retreat into a world where you want to obviously keep working and keep producing, and perhaps the standards have just been gone into the background a bit. But I think, like you say, I think as things unfold, we'll see more activity again, and I think the first of that, certainly face to face, will be next year in Renton when S1000D and eBusiness have their conference. So we'll certainly be there. Hopefully, we'll see you there, and I'm sure it'll be a good and valuable event. We'd probably like to present a paper, so it'd be good if we actually see people in face to face rather than remotely. So thank you, Don. I think that's the questions. Thanks for the input, everybody. If you're interested in anything or have any comments, any more comments or questions, please drop either myself or Don an email. We'll be happy to try and answer those questions. So it only leaves me saying thank you for attending today. I know your time is valuable. I hope you've enjoyed it, and we will be sending out an email with a link to the recording if you want to pass it on to any of your colleagues. So thank you, everybody, and have a great day. Thank you.